Hello, this is Dan Arth, and for the next 1 hour, I will be reading from the July 22nd, which is Wednesday, issue of the Toronto Star on your Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. We will start with the headlines. Premier's weigh tariff response. Article is by Raza Patel, Ryan Tumulty, and Rob Ferguson. Prime Minister Mark Carney says he and U.S. President Donald Trump have agreed to ramp up trade negotiations over the coming weeks, but Canada is considering, quote, all options to respond if sweeping new U.S. tariffs take effect next month. We agreed to intensify negotiations in the coming weeks, and the team and myself look forward to doing that, Carney said Tuesday after speaking with Trump earlier that morning. Senior Canadian and American officials were in touch in the hours leading up to the U.S. President's Monday order, the Prime Minister's office told The Star. Washington's move to slap 50% tariffs on billions of dollars of Canadian imports covered by the Canada-U.S.-Mexico Agreement, CUSMA, nevertheless blindsided some political leaders. Most of us had not heard about it until we arrived there and started receiving notifications on our phones, said Prince Edward Island Premier Rob Lance, who is hosting Canada's premiers this week in Charlottetown. Carney said if the tariffs take effect on August 19th, his government will do, quote, whatever it takes to address the new threat as it also works toward reaching a renegotiated free trade pact, while Premier Doug Ford agitated on Tuesday for retaliatory measures to make the White House feel the pain of its actions. The new tariffs will apply to alcohol, autos, and dairy products, sectors where the Americans argue Canada is discriminating against the U.S., as well as a variety of other products, including clothing, wood products, wigs, and hockey sticks. By the end of the day, Tuesday, Canada had offered up a small but pointed signal of its discontent. The federal government scrapped its plans for a joint celebration with the U.S. ahead of the Gordie Howe International Bridge opening, instead announcing that Canadians would mark the occasion sans the Stars and Stripes, or without the Stars and Stripes. At the White House on Tuesday, Trump said Canada has been, quote, very tough on us over the years. But their leadership, from former Prime Minister Justin Trudeau to the current leadership, I mean, in all fairness to them, they need us to survive. Without us, there's no way they can survive, Trump said. The U.S. president was fielding questions about a separate tariff threat he leveled last week regarding smoke from Canadian forest fires, noting that further trade action was still under consideration. Carney defended Canada's response to American trade actions that began more than a year ago and which he said violated the free trade deal between both countries. He said his primary objective is to reach a more comprehensive trade pact. Said Carney, the country is stronger because we are united, and we will remain united. Trump's latest move comes after Canada rolled back or agreed to review several policies that had become U.S. trade irritants, reworked an agreement governing the Gordie Howe International Bridge, and saw Washington decline to extend CUSMA in its current form. Ford urged the Prime Minister on Tuesday to take a harder line with Trump, warning that $28 billion in annual Canadian exports are at stake. We always seem to be on our back heels. We need to be on the offense. A clearly frustrated Ford told reporters at the Premier's annual conference, I'm losing patience. Ford suggested using Canada's oil, gas, and electricity resources as leverage. Last year, Ontario said it was prepared to put a surtax on electricity exports to several U.S. states, but scrapped the move at the last minute because of U.S. objections. We could dismantle the U.S. if we wanted to, if we all work together, no matter if it's the electricity, the potash, the oil. We're their number one customer in the world, he said, and they need to feel the pain. After a virtual meeting with Carney, several premiers said there is hope a CUSMA deal can be reached before the tariff start date. And our next article, why U.S. wildfire tariff threats are serious. Is Canada exercising due diligence on prevention and response? That's where the debate begins. Article is by Alan Woods. It taints the skies, chokes the lungs, and risks further irritating the strained cross-border relationship. But it is much less clear whether U.S. President Donald Trump has a legitimate case for imposing tariffs due to southbound Canadian wildfire smoke, as he has threatened. It may have come off last week as so much political hot air, but wildfire tariffs or demands for compensation should be taken seriously in the wake of Monday's provocative decision to impose 50% retaliatory tariffs on Canadian goods starting in 30 days. Those tariffs follow two separate threats by the American leader to punish Canada for forest fire smoke that has been blown across the Canada-U.S. border, as well as the tabling of a bill by Ohio Republican Senator Bernie Moreno that would impose tariffs on Canada, a travel ban on Canadian officials, and declare Mark Wiseman, Canada's ambassador to Washington, quote, persona non grata. Trump said he told Prime Minister Mark Carney during Sunday's World Cup final match, quote, you've got to stop those fires from coming in and poisoning our air. If we can help them, and we'll help them, he said of Canada, but maybe they should pay us some damages or we should do some tariffs, said Trump. The laws around what is known as transboundary harms are almost as hazy as last week's North American skies. But when examining responsibility for dirty air that blows straight through international borders, most legal scholars look to the century-old case of a zinc smelting operation in Trail, British Columbia, about 11 kilometers from the Canada-U.S. border. Farmers downwind in Washington state had long complained that sulfur dioxide emissions from the smelting process were being blown south and damaging their crops and livestock. The U.S. government eventually complained on their behalf to Ottawa, which initially paid $428,000 in compensation, and after a years-long adjudication process that ended in 1941, agreed to adopt stricter rules to limit emissions. But the lasting interest in the Trail smelter case is the adjudicator's conclusion that, quote, no state has the right to use or permit the use of its territory in such a manner as to cause injury by fumes in or to the territory of another. In the 85 years since the matter was concluded, the law has, quote, evolved, said Neil Craik, a professor of environmental and international law at the University of Waterloo. The right of a sovereign country not to be invaded by air pollution must now be balanced with the right of an equally sovereign country to use its territory and property as it pleases. Said Craik, the standard of conduct is now very well understood to be due diligence. When you think about it in the wildfire context, the question you have to ask yourself is Canada exercising due diligence with respect to practices in preventing and responding to wildfires? That is where the debate begins. Moreno's bill says that Canada, quote, has failed to take sufficient and timely measures to prevent, mitigate, or respond to repeated transboundary wildfire smoke events affecting the United States. The U.S. Environmental Protection Agency said in a June 17 statement that officials would, quote, remain continuously engaged with Canadian leadership at the highest levels of their government and strongly encourage them to do everything in their power to extinguish these fires as fast as possible. Ontario Premier Doug Ford called Trump's wildfire tariff threats, quote, a bunch of rubbish. Maybe President Trump would offer his closest allies and friends some support rather than sit there and threaten tariffs, he said Monday, adding that Carney and the provincial and territorial premiers were set to discuss a national fire strategy in meetings this week in Prince Edward Island. As of Monday, the Canadian Interagency Fire Center put the national preparedness level at 4 out of 5, meaning that there was significant wildfire activity in multiple jurisdictions and that the demand for firefighters and equipment was high. Level 5 is reached when Canadian wildland fire officials have judged it necessary to formally request international assistance. In our next article, 6 belugas make it safely to U.S. aquariums. Whales flown from Toronto to Chicago and San Antonio. Article is by Liam Casey. 6 captive belugas from Canada are now swimming in the waters of their new homes in the United States. Marineland and a consortium of U.S. aquariums helped move the first batch of whales in a long, complex process that began Monday afternoon at the former Niagara Falls, Ontario tourist attraction. Marineland has been closed to the public since 2024 as it looks to sell the park and its sprawling property a very short distance from Horseshoe Falls. It has said it is running out of money and can no longer care for the whales. The park had 30 belugas and 4 dolphins before Monday's move. It is the largest complement of captive belugas in the entire world and also Canada's last remaining captive whales and dolphins. They are set to head over multiple moves to 5 marine parks: Shed Aquarium in Chicago, SeaWorld San Antonio, another SeaWorld in San Diego, Georgia Aquarium in Atlanta, and Oceanographic Valencia in Spain. 4 female belugas, Sierra, Acadia, Osiris, and Lillooet, arrived at Shed's Aquarium's waters in the wee hours of Tuesday morning. Sierra was first lifted out of Marineland Pool shortly after 4:30 p.m. on Monday. Bertie Bott's and Frankie, both males, were hoisted onto their tanks by 8 p.m. before a large police escorted convoy drove several hours to Toronto Pearson International Airport, where they were loaded on a large cargo jet. Bertie Bott's and Frankie remained on the plane while the others were dropped off in Chicago before the pair headed off to their new home in SeaWorld in San Antonio. They ended up there later Tuesday morning. Johnny Ford, a spokesperson for the U.S. consortium who works at Shed, said the whales are doing well after the journey. All right, let's move over to some sports articles. No ray of hope in blowout. Article by Mike Wilner. What a mess. The Blue Jays post All-Star break woes continued in an ugly 12-2 loss to the Tampa Bay Rays at the Rogers Center on Tuesday, their 6th defeat in 7 games. The Jays were behind the 8-ball early as the Rays, losers of 5 of 6 games coming in, mounted a 3-run rally that began with 2 out and nobody on in the top of the first. 2 runs scored on a softly hit ball to right field by Johnny DeLuca, and another on a soft line single by Chandler Simpson, one of his 4 hits on the night. The way things have been going lately, the Jays were pretty much done at that point. They came into the game having scored only 2 runs in their last 29 innings, But the visitors did not stop there. Tampa Bay added a pair in the fourth with help from a throwing error by catcher Brandon Valenzuela, driving starter Kevin Gausman from the game. Nick Fortes belted a 3-run homer in the fifth to extend the Rays' lead to an embarrassing 8-0. And you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on your Niagara Frontier radio reading service. The Jays finally got some offense in the sixth when Ernie Clement led off with a bloop single to shallow right, and George Springer blasted a ringing double off the left field wall. Springer's double was the Jays' first extra base hit in 25 innings, covering 96 plate appearances. Clement scored while Dalton Varsho beat out a ground ball to first base, and Springer came in on Kazuma Okamoto's double play ball. Okamoto is 0 for 18 since the All-Star break. Patrick Corbin came in to mop up, but after 2 scoreless innings, he only managed to record 1 out while facing 6 batters in the ninth, allowing 3-run homer to Yandy Diaz. Outfielder Miles Straw had to come in to bail Corbin out. The 12 runs scored by Tampa Bay matched the Jays' total in their last 6 games combined. Boos rained down from the sellout crowd of 42,881 as the Jays dropped to a season-high 9 games under 500 and 6 games back of the final American League wild card spot. And we'll stay with sports, so move over to basketball. Nobody seems to have an inkling of LeBron's next move, still a key factor to the NBA's business. The indecision has become a series. Article is by Dave Fashuk. It's been a little more than 16 years since LeBron James gave us the decision, wherein basketball's self-proclaimed king announced his intention to take his talents to South Beach. Some saw that ill-advised exercise in ego as James's first major career misstep, and maybe they were right. In rose-colored retrospect, though, you can say this for the decision. At least it required James to make one. All these years later, we're left with a much less satisfying summer of indecision. More than 2/3 of the way through July, nobody in the NBA seems to have the slightest inkling of LeBron James's next move. And if you believe the public utterances of James' outsized agent Rich Paul, that's because neither does James. Said Paul, if he doesn't really know, you can't rush it. He stated on the latest edition of his Game Over podcast with Max Kellerman, which dropped late Monday. You can't make somebody know something they don't know, Paul stated. For a self-styled chess master like James, who has always seemed several moves ahead of the competition both on and off the court, this summertime brain freeze plays against type. In 2010, when James alienated Cleveland to join the Miami Heat in his first shot at free agency, the league-wide limbo lasted all of a week. In 2014, when James leaked his prodigal son return to Northeast Ohio in a Sports Illustrated cover story, he only left people hanging until July 11th, when he bolted for the LA Lakers in 2018, perhaps chastened by previous blowback. He had the decency to make it known on day one of free agency, July 1st. Add up the days in which James has been an NBA free agent until this year, and you get less than 3 weeks thereabouts. Yet, here he is in his 4th chance at free agency, already more than 3 weeks in surpassing that total in one go. Clearly, it doesn't matter that the NBA would appreciate knowing James's intention, so they might set the schedule for marquee moments like opening night and Christmas Day. Said Adam Silver, we have to finish up the schedule, and where LeBron plays will affect the schedule, the NBA commissioner said last week. So I would like him to make his announcement already. Exactly why it's taking so long is not clear. Considering this is the NBA, the evergreen guess is Incurable narcissism, even if Paul protests. Said Paul, we're not making this about attention and a spectacle. Take that at face value, and you can understand why James might be hesitating to pull the trigger. At age 41, he's still an athletic marvel. Just this past spring, he looked impressive, leading the Lakers to a playoff series win over Houston en route to getting swept by the Oklahoma Thunder. Still, his mere presence in a lineup no longer guarantees the kind of team success it once did, which probably gives you the answer to the question. This is less about choosing a team and more about reasserting relevance. It was only a few weeks ago that James, don't forget, announced his intention to leave the Lakers. It clearly didn't sit well in LeBron land that there was not a lot of crying in Southern California, where the consensus seemed content to move with the future centered on Luka Doncic. The inherent disrespect to James's legacy in LA, where, to be fair, he did deliver the franchise's 17th championship, seems to be a driving force of what's going on since. As Paul said sarcastically on his podcast, commenting on Silver's pleas for schedule clarity, I thought nobody cared about LeBron. Socialists, take note. The neediest among us are the billionaires. If this was strictly about basketball, the betting favorite to land James's services, the Miami Heat, would be awfully good if he rejoined them. For all that, the Heat, even with Giannis Antetokounmpo, sorry for that pronunciation, we'll just go with Giannis, and Bam Adebayo lack depth. Cleveland is potentially deeper, albeit with questions around their postseason worthiness, which is why the Philadelphia 76ers are also seen to be in the mix to land LeBron James, already one of the offseason's biggest winners as the beneficiary of Boston's offloading of Jaylen Brown. They have the young oomph of Tyrese Maxey and VJ Edgecombe, plus a proven championship coach in Nick Nurse. Alas, they've also got an unseemly unknown, the mercurial Joel Embiid. There's an attractiveness in some eyes to James joining Steph Curry and the Golden State Warriors. Maybe that's still a possibility, although according to his agent, it's possible James just doesn't know. There's no perfect situation, Paul said on his most recent podcast. My thing is, I'd rather have no expectation and then get a surprise than have all this expectation and then be disappointed. That's as naive an assertion as you'll get from an industry giant. If there was no expectation after all, there would be no attention. And with James, commanding attention has always been a core competency. And let's move over to business. Our next article, Trump's bridge deal. Is Ottawa rewarding shakedown? Article is by David Olive. This is not how completion of the Gordie Howe International Bridge should have ended, with Canada giving in to another U.S. shakedown. A few days before the bridge's originally scheduled opening on June 15th, U.S. President Donald Trump renewed his threat, first stated in February, to block the opening of the Canadian-built and financed Windsor-Detroit Bridge. Trump claimed that Canada would reap too large a portion of the tolls collected from the bridge. He said that the U.S. should derive revenue from the bridge. On July 10th, Ottawa announced it had reached a deal with Washington that will see the bridge open on July 27th. The Gordie Howe Bridge will strengthen one of the world's busiest trade corridors, which conveys an estimated $1 billion in goods each day. The consensus of Canadian political and business leaders tilted to doing whatever deal was necessary with the U.S. to get the bridge opened. Only a bad deal was an offer, and Ottawa took it. Mark Carney, the Prime Minister, had impressed on Trump that a great deal of U.S. labor and steel had been used in the bridge's construction. And Carney told the president that the entire $6.4 billion cost of the bridge was paid by Canada to break the monopoly of the Ambassador Bridge, the new bridge's nearly 97-year-old rival. But Trump held out for a deal that profits the U.S. unfairly. In blocking the Gordie Howe, Trump was effectively ripping up the 2012 Windsor-Detroit Bridge deal between Canada and the government of Michigan. Said Colin Robertson, a former career Canadian diplomat, this is not just a story about a bridge. Trump cannot be trusted to honor any agreement negotiated in good faith, considered by all parties to be binding, or even celebrated by him and his administration. Under the 2012 agreement, Canada was to operate the new crossing and collect all the tolls from it until the cost of building the bridge was recouped. Retiring that debt will now take longer because Canada has agreed to a Trump demand that the U.S. receive half of the net revenue from the bridge for 15 years. That is a windfall, given that the U.S. has paid practically nothing toward the bridge's construction. The debt payments that Canadian taxpayers will absorb will be higher than before Trump's intervention, since a portion of the tolls previously committed to debt repayment will instead go to the U.S. Trump also demanded and got a veto over future changes in the bridge's tolls. U.S. approval is required if the Gordie Howe raises tolls by 10% or cuts them below tolls charged by comparable regional crossings. There's only one such crossing, the Ambassador, owned by the Maroon family, a major contributor to Trump's campaign war chest. The Gordie Howe needs to charge lower tolls than the Ambassador to garner enough traffic to be financially viable. But Trump's negotiators have fixed it so that the Ambassador will win any price war between the bridges if the U.S. denies a Gordie Howe request to lower its tolls to match the Ambassador. The thuggery here is self-evident, as the U.S. president places no value on the relationship with Canada. Treating us like Putin looks at Belarus, he is exercising leverage, or in other words, a shakedown. Bob Ray, former Canadian ambassador to the UN, wrote of the bridge debacle in a recent Star Opinion article. So why did Canada agree to this extortionate deal? Answer: for the same reason the Carney government scrapped most of the Trudeau era counter tariffs by which Canada stood up to Trump's initial tariff assault. Carney also rescinded the DST, Digital Services Tax, to advance broader trade negotiations with the United States. The tax would have mostly affected large U.S. tech firms, and the government now appears to be gutting its online streaming act, a bid to tax U.S. streaming giants like Netflix, Disney, and Paramount on the billions of dollars in business they do in Canada. But if Canadian trade strategists think those concessions will soften up the U.S. in an upcoming renegotiation of the Canada-U.S.-Mexico agreement, they need to think again. The Trump team doesn't see much value in the many Canadian concessions to date. Said Jameson Greer, they don't really get credit for doing something bad and then undoing it, right? He is a top trade negotiator. Last week, he stated, and that's just good practice on their part. Actually, good practice would see an end to dealing with the U.S. issue by issue. Instead, the flashpoints should be bundled with all the economic, energy, security, and critical minerals benefits Canada provides to the U.S. Quote, the Trump administration's preferred tactic is to hold hostage a Canadian asset, steel, aluminum, autos, dairy, lumber, and now even a bridge, and demand ransom, Robertson wrote. This is how we've repeatedly let ourselves get rolled. And we'll stay within the business section for our next article. Patios, a boon for restaurants, but it's no free lunch. Landlords increasing rents based on extra seating. Article is by Daniel Johnson. If it weren't for patios, Matthew Senecal Junkier says he wouldn't be in business today. He owns 2 restaurants in Vancouver through his company, the Birds and the Beats Food Group. The Chinatown location had a small patio that was extended through the city's street side patio program in 2020. The program also allowed him to build a new patio at his Gastown location after years of trying, since city regulations before the pandemic had prevented it. The new patio was, quote, a game changer, Senecal Junkier said. It really was what allowed us to stay afloat. Patios are still a critical driver for restaurant revenue. 6 years after the COVID-19 pandemic drove demand for outdoor dining. However, restaurant operators say they are not as lucrative as they once were, as the extra seats are now being factored into higher rental costs. And you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on your Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. Senecal Junkier said the extra patio space means his business is roughly 40% busier in the summer. He estimates the increased traffic has translated to a 20 to 30% sales bump. Quote, we almost don't see the interior in the summer. Everybody wants to be out on the patio, he said. Patio dining became newly popular during the pandemic as it allowed people to eat outdoors while being mindful of social distancing practices at a time when gathering inside was risky. Restaurants can choose to set up patio spaces differently, with some looking to create a busy and fun atmosphere while others opt for calmer and quieter spaces for their patrons. Some restaurants have been running their patios for years, while others more recently moved to capitalize on demand for outdoor dining. Even when the weather doesn't cooperate, Senecal Junkier said consumers come back with fiercer demand when the sun is back out. When patios became more popular during the pandemic, he said it was essentially a free lunch for anyone who already had one in their existing lease structure, at least for the first few years. Quote, now when landlords are leasing a space, they're able to factor in what that patio opportunity is and price the rent of the space accordingly, Senecal Junkier said. When it was time to renew the lease on one of his restaurants in 2023, he said the patio was factored into the rental cost and drove up the price per square foot. There are also other costs associated with running a patio. When extra space for outdoor dining means removing street parking, space is owned by the municipality. Senecal Junkier said restaurants often have to offset the lost revenue for the city. I commend the city. They committed to making it revenue neutral from their perspective. We still pay about $16,000 a year for the patio, which I'm more than happy to do, he said. Data from OpenTable released in May found reservations for outdoor dining increased by 24% year over year in Canada. July ranks as the most popular month to sit outside. Our next business article is in the real estate section. Average price for new home fell 15% year over year in June, report finds. Article is by Clary Feinstein. The average price of a new single-family home in the GTA was down significantly in June from 12 months ago as more semi-detached and townhomes entered the market. Condos, however, remained at a price floor, although the price doesn't include possible discounts for bulk purchases. The price of a new single-family home was $1.27 million in June, down 15% from the same month in 2025. The Building Industry and Land Development Association, BILD, said in its Wednesday report. Quote, this is attributable to the mix of new openings and releases throughout the month, said Edward Jegg, research manager at Altus Group, Build's source for new home data. Most of the single-family homes that entered the market were semi-detached, and townhomes, which are typically at a much lower price point than detached homes, he said. Condos were $1.03 million in June, remaining at a price bottom, the report said. Prices for single-family homes and condos are gross prices, meaning they do not include the HST rebate that came into effect in April and exempts buyers from the 13% HST on select new homes for 1 year. Build said they didn't include the rebate to be able to compare like-on-like comparisons to previous years. There was a total of 1,175 new home sales in June, up 130% from the record low June in 2025, but still 52% below the 10-year average of 2,456 units. There were 902 single-family home sales in the GTA last month, a significant year-over-year increase of more than 200% and 36% above the 10-year average. Single-family homes include detached and semi-detached houses and townhouses, excluding stacked townhouses. June 2026 new home sales in the GTA once again were propelled by the single-family sector, which benefited from the HST rebate program, JEG said. On March 25th, the federal and provincial governments announced they were injecting $2.2 billion into Ontario's sputtering home construction industry with a 1-year break on the HST for buyers of new houses and condos. This means buyers are exempt from the 13% harmonized sales tax on all new homes worth $1 million or less, with the equivalent in savings for new homes up to $1.5 million. The waiver started on April 1st and expanded on an existing HST rebate introduced last fall that was only available to first-time buyers of new homes. While there has been noticeable success for sales in the single-family home segment, sales for condos have struggled. Condos, which include units in low, medium, and high-rise buildings and stacked townhouses, accounted for 273 units sold in the GTA in June, an increase from June of 2025 of almost 26%, but 85% below the 10-year average. The condominium sector has started to show some small gains, but continued to be hampered by inventory that has shown less flexibility for pricing changes, JEG said. June's condo sales numbers could include bulk sales, but the prices reflect asking or listing prices, not the discounts offered from the HST rebate or any discounts developers may have offered for buying multiple units at once. And our next article is under the culture section. Heritage building gets new life. A new Irish cultural hub is setting up at the waterfront's former Canada Malting Plant office. Article is by David Friend. A long vacant heritage building on Toronto's waterfront will reopen this fall as a new arts and culture hub after a $20 million restoration project. The Canada-Ireland Foundation announced Wednesday that the Corlac, a restored multi-purpose arts center at the foot of Bathurst Street, will officially launch November 18th with the Canadian premiere of Samuel Beckett's tragic comedy Endgame, performed by Ireland's Druid Theatre Company. It's the first major event hosted at the 9,600 square foot venue on Irene Quay, adjacent to Ireland Park. The facility has been under a soft launch this spring, with gatherings tied to the Luminato Festival and an Irish Theatre Festival. The opening caps a years-long effort to transform the former administrative offices of the Canada Malting silos into a multi-use cultural space for theatre, music, visual arts, and community programming. It will also house the CIF's offices and conference rooms. The restoration of the early modernist building next to the Billy Bishop Airport Terminal is part of a larger revitalization of the Irene Quay neighborhood. I always describe it as it is the most beautiful building you have walked past and never noticed, the CIF's executive director, William Peet, told The Star. It's industrial, so it doesn't have big flourishes, but it has that beautiful yellow brick that's synonymous with Toronto. The CIF signed a lease with the City of Toronto in 2021 to redevelop the vacant 2.5-story building, which had sat mostly unused since the 1980s. Earlier this year, Canadian Heritage announced funding through the Cultural Spaces Fund to complete the venue's performance infrastructure, including lighting, sound, and staging systems. Ontario contributed $2.2 million, while the City of Toronto invested $4.4 million toward the renovations. Pete said the Irish government provided about $3 million, with other amounts coming from private donors. Endgame, directed by Tony Award winner Gary Hines, will showcase the main auditorium, which will seat just over 100 people for each performance, running through November 28th. Tickets are on sale Thursday through to the Canada Ireland Foundation website. It is going to be an incredible, intimate experience, said Pete. You will never sit so close to actors who are at such top of their game. Pete said the Corlac spaces are intended to welcome everyone in the City of Toronto, with the capability of hosting weddings and conferences as well as performances. It is not an ethno-specific bastion of Irish culture, he added, but the venue will play a central role in next year's Canada-Ireland 180, a series of events marking the 180th anniversary of the arrival of Irish famine refugees in Canada. In our next culture story, award-winning Canadian humorist got laughs but kept practicing law. Article is by Nicole Thompson. Morley Torgov, who regaled readers by spinning stories of growing up Jewish in small-town Ontario into award-winning works of humor, died at age 98 this week. His family says he died on Sunday of age-related complications from a brief illness. Originally a lawyer, Torgov took up writing as a hobby in adulthood and went on to win several literary awards while continuing his career in law. He was best known for The Outside Chance of Maximilian Glick, which in 1983 won the Stephen Leacock Medal for humor. The novel, which was adapted into a film in 1988, tells the story of a boy who is desperate to study music against his parents' wishes in an isolated Jewish community in Manitoba. That was the second of his books to win the Leacock Medal, Canada's top literary humor prize. The first, A Good Place to Come From, took home the award in 1975. The book is a memoir of Torgov's childhood in Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario, in the 1930s and early 40s. In 2008, he published Murder in a Major, a historical mystery novel featuring the music-loving Herman Price, whom he brought back for a second book, The Master Singer from Minsk, in 2012. Torgov was named to the Order of Canada in 2015, with the Governor General's office citing his distinct ability to combine poignant and comic moments while perfectly capturing the immigrant experience. His family says he is survived by his wife, Anna Pearl, his daughter, Sarah Torgov Steinberg, and 4 grandchildren. All right, we'll go back to the business section. Survey finds most Canadians believe their vehicles are vulnerable to theft. Article is by Alicia Passafiume. Even though vehicle thefts have been trending down across much of the country, the overwhelming majority of Canadians still feel their vehicle's anti-theft technology isn't as robust as it should be. And that is the conclusion of an Angus Reid survey commissioned by Equate Association, a nonprofit anti-fraud group. Brian Gast, Equate's Vice President of Investigative Services, said the survey's key finding that nearly 80% of Canadians feel their vehicles are or could be vulnerable to thieves did not surprise him. Quote, the reality of modern auto theft is that locking your car door is no longer enough. Organized crime has traded crowbars for technology-based theft, such as key fob, relay attacks, and reprogramming to easily bypass a vehicle security system, he said. We really have to move into the prevention piece, stopping the vehicle from being stolen in the first place to really have a sustained decline of auto theft in Canada, he said. An Equate Association report released in February said while the number of vehicles stolen in Canada fell sharply in 2025, almost 47,000 thefts were reported that year, and more than a third of those were never recovered. In 2024, the federal government announced a new national action plan to disrupt, dismantle, and prosecute the organized crime groups behind auto thefts through tougher criminal penalties, more inspections of shipping containers, and better intelligence sharing. And you are listening to a reading of articles and features from the Toronto Star on your Niagara Frontier Radio reading service. The Equate report from February said while the strategy appeared to be working, Canadians remain vulnerable to car theft rings and a spike in vehicle finance fraud detected at ports in Montreal and Halifax. Equate Association is calling for robust anti-theft mechanisms to be made standard in every new vehicle. The Angus Reid survey suggests 60% of Canadians want government-mandated protections in new vehicles, and 75% feel those technologies are necessary. In the meantime, Gast said consumers are taking safety measures into their own hands. He said he recommends a layered approach to vehicle safety that extends from simple things like parking in garages and keeping the doors locked to installing immobilizers and trackers. Anything that you can do to make your vehicle less of a target takes more time for the criminals to steal, he said. Equate's February report said Quebec saw the largest reduction in auto thefts in 2025, 25%, followed by Ontario at 22% and Western Canada at 11%. Atlantic Canada saw the smallest reduction, just 2%. While the number of thefts dropped, the rate of recovery for stolen vehicles remains low, the report found at 59% nationally. The report said that in Ontario and Quebec, only about half of the vehicles stolen are ever recovered. The report said the missing stolen vehicles have likely been exported or dismantled in chop shops. And our next article in the business section, France bans social media for kids younger than 15. Bill also prohibits mobile phones in high schools. Article by Samuel Petriquin. France banned children under 15 from using social media on Tuesday, becoming the first country in the EU to pass a blanket ban on the platforms as concerns grow worldwide over the harmful effects of digital content on kids. Both chambers of the parliament voted in favor of the measure, a flagship initiative of French President Emmanuel Macron's second term. The bill also bans the use of mobile phones in high schools. Several families in France have sued TikTok over teen suicides they say are linked to harmful content. Children's advocates and parents applauded the vote. Quote, "We have been campaigning for this bill from the start because, frankly, we have no other option, no other way to counter tech giants," said Gaël Bourbonda, a 52-year-old who lives in the Paris region. "The only thing we can do is protect our children, just as we protect our children from drinking alcohol." Bourbonde told the Associated Press her daughter was in 7th grade when she got her first smartphone. A parental control app helped monitor what she did online, but Bourbonde had no idea what TikTok really was. After a few months, the family realized the daughter was cutting herself and was suffering from anorexia and depression. She spent a year and a half in the hospital, but is now 16 and well. The legislation is one of the final major measures adopted under Macron's presidency before he leaves office next year. Macron wants the law to take effect at the start of the new school year in September. However, a review to determine whether the bill complies with the French Constitution is likely to take place and could delay its implementation. France is leading the way in Europe in protecting our children and our teenagers, Macron said. We will keep on going. The ban won't cover online encyclopedias or educational or scientific directories. Lawmakers from the left-wing party France Unbowed opposed the bill, arguing that its constitutionality is unclear. It would effectively end online anonymity, and it would be impossible to enforce. Inès Legendre, a legal advisor for the online protection group e-Enfance, said the law will not immediately translate into an outright ban. We'll also have to address the issue of existing accounts for those under 15. How do we identify them? How do we suspend them? And then there's the question of age verification for all new accounts that will come into effect, she said. According to France's health watchdog, 1 in 2 teenagers spends between 2 and 5 hours a day on a smartphone. In a report published in December, it said that some 90% of children between 12 and 17 use smartphones daily to access the internet, with 58% of them using their devices for social networks. The report highlighted a range of harmful effects stemming from the use of social networks, including reduced self-esteem and increased exposure to content associated with risky behaviors such as self-harm, drug use, and suicide. After the European Commission found that the latest version of the bill overlapped with the EU's Digital Services Act, which sets strict rules aimed at keeping internet users safe online, lawmakers held final negotiations Monday. They reached an agreement on an amended version of the legislation, which was then submitted to both chambers for final vote. Growing awareness of the danger social media poses for young, developing brains has showed up in a wave of new restrictions globally. And we'll close with a sports article. Plenty of gain with pain. League sees hypergrowth amid Engelbert's poor relationship with players. Article is by Doug Feinberg. The WNBA has grown at an exponential rate during Kathy Engelbert's tenure as commissioner, a stewardship that has been tumultuous at times. Engelbert is the second longest tenured WNBA president or commissioner, with 7 years at the helm. She helped negotiate a transformative collective bargaining agreement this past spring that gives the WNBA its first core of million-dollar player salaries. There's not a lot of jobs where you can make over 30-plus millionaires instantly, right? Engelbert said in a phone interview heading into this weekend's WNBA All-Star festivities in Chicago. It just doesn't exist in most companies, except if you're like a stock option company and your stock does really well. Most of them are under the age of 30, and there are more to come. Even with the financial gains, the WNBA's growth has come amid a strained partnership between the commissioner and players. Engelbert has been criticized for how she has handled various situations, including for being out of touch or not doing enough to help combat social media vitriol. She met with the executive committee of the Players Union on Tuesday to discuss the recent uptick in online hatred and threats directed toward players. New York Liberty All-Star Breanna Stewart, vice president of the executive committee, said there is a respect for Engelbert among the players, just not much of a relationship. Her Liberty teammate Sabrina Ionescu said she talks more to NBA Commissioner Adam Silver than Engelbert. While Engelbert continues to try to strengthen her relationship with players, the business of the WNBA has thrived. Engelbert was involved in talks that led to a record media rights deal worth more than $3 billion U.S. The league has had record ratings, attendance, and team valuations and will expand to a record 18 teams by 2030. We've been in hyper-growth mode now for 2 or 3 years, and companies, if you look back in time, you're not in hyper-growth mode forever. Engelbert said, we are preparing ourselves now for the next version of ourselves, which probably isn't hyper-growth. The league has grown from a business standpoint, including navigating the COVID pandemic that could have crippled the WNBA. Give Kathy credit as she advocated for the season. Seattle Storm owner Ginny Gilder said, "We had no idea what was going to happen. People had to make decisions. Kathy pushed the Board of Governors to not only have a shortened season, but to fully pay the players. Don't bicker. We were going to figure out the finances." Expansion fees have gone up fivefold over the past few seasons. Golden State paid $50 million to join the league, and Cleveland, Detroit, and Philadelphia all joining the league over the next 4 years, each paid $250 million. Kathy, with all the work she did and the staff she hired, deserves a tremendous amount of credit for that, Gilder said. If you look around the league from 2015 to 2020 to now, you know it is a completely new day. Valuations of teams were around $5 to $10 million a decade ago, and now the average is around $460 million, Engelbert said. It's nearly impossible to turn on a major sporting event over the past few years without seeing a WNBA player featured in a commercial. From Gatorade to State Farm, Nike, and CarMax, product ads feature some of the league's top newsmakers, including Caitlin Clark, Angel Reese, Aja Wilson, and Sabrina Ionescu. Engelbert said when Clark was drafted, it created a domino effect because they started seeing the value of putting players in their ads and then separately endorsing the players. I'm really proud of that because when I came to the league, absent a few sneaker ads, I don't remember any player in spots. Maybe there were a few. Engelbert deflected questions about her future other than to say she's turning 62 this year, and that was the mandatory retirement age at her old job at Deloitte, where she was the president. I haven't given it a ton of thought. We'll think about it, Engelbert said, of how long she will stay in her current role. I always tell people, don't focus on me, focus on the rest of my team. You always want to leave an organization better than you found it. Internally, we're proud of the team that we have built. With media rights stable for the next decade, as well as labor peace achieved and expansion finished for the immediate future, Engelbert said her list of priorities includes a look at the oft-criticized officiating. She also wants to help teams with lower attendance improve their numbers and expand the league's international footprint. And you have been listening to a reading of articles and features from the July 22nd, Wednesday issue of the Toronto Star. Your reader has been myself, Dan Arth, and I thank you for listening.